So, hello. I guess probably we should just start by saying how we got involved in this Allegra Brigata, as Paula likes to call it. I think I first was contacted by Eri De Luca and Paula Brisson because they had already launched the idea of doing this series of short stories that would become short videos. And Eri had written his, and since I'd been translating him, they contacted me to do that. Um, but then, of course, we started talking about it, talking about other possible writers, and one of the first people I decided I would get them to recruit was you, and mainly a couple of different reasons. One, I like the idea of this project involving writers from as many different places as possible, but also when you're trying to get somebody to write basically for free with no preparation and everything needs to be done in 5 minutes, you need to ask friends. So that's why, a couple of different reasons.
I'm very happy you asked me, and obviously, I mean, the reason I got into it was you, but also because you mentioned that this was Eri De Luca's project, and I'm a great fan of his fiction. And then, of course, later on, when I got in touch with Paula, she mentioned some other excellent writers were involved in it. So that was the main reason. The lockdown, of course, had also started in Denmark. It was nowhere as bad as it was in Italy or France in those days. But still, it was a way in which I could connect to other writers and maybe also think about what was happening.
Yeah. No, for me too, the idea that we're making connections despite our own little isolated islands scattered across the globe. I mean, becoming an archipelago of sorts is a positive political project, I think. So I guess the next obvious question I have is, as I recall, I think the idea came first. I think you even asked, so is it okay if I write something that's placed in India? And I said, yeah, of course. That I think they'd really like that. So how about, when did the idea of the canine protagonist come up?
Well, I mean, I wanted something that would bring in other aspects. Around that time, of course, we were all very worried about our own species. Homo sapiens, and it struck me, as it struck a lot of us, that obviously we were not just the victims, we were also the problem. So I wanted to do a story that would bring in other species too, and that would also narrate us not just as victims, but also the cause of what was happening. Because obviously, even though we can very easily blame the virus and whatnot, any pandemic like this also has a very obvious human aspect.
Yeah. No, I think it's one of the things I most enjoy about your story in particular is well, it's not only that it goes beyond we humans, but it also does it in a way that's rather slippery, because you start, and I think it takes a while for the listener to know exactly who it is that's speaking, right? And so for a while you see and think that these might be people that are treated like dogs rather than dogs, and then by the end, I think, at least for me, I mean, this is my reading of your story, but it feels almost as if not only is technology and our civilization unstoppable, it's in some sense much like the virus itself. I mean, it seems to have in some sense. I mean, I don't think you could have predicted it, because when you wrote it, this hadn't happened yet. But some of the conflict even feels like, are we supposed to open up? Are things supposed to go back to normal, or is that when the real violence begins?
Exactly. Exactly. I think it was kind of predictable because even in the early days, it was obvious that we were not really looking at the real problem, the problem behind the virus, including economic problems. So I was almost certain that whenever we ended up opening up, we would be adding to the destruction, adding to the pain and suffering, which is of course what has happened more or less.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess the other thing we should talk about is the fact that this isn't just your story, right? It's also a story that it has become a performance, and I think it's one of the fantastic aspects of this project is how it's a collective effort, right? I mean, there are these beautiful sets, and then each story is performed by an actor, and yours, of course, is one that's has a tremendous talent. So maybe you can talk a bit about how Shabana came into the project.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I have done a couple of literary festivals that also had Shabana Azmi and her husband, who is a very well-known poet in India and a public um, public personality. But of course, I didn't really know them. So when you asked me and Paula asked me about the actor who could actually read out the story, I obviously thought of Shabana Azmi as one of the great actors of our time. But I didn't know whether I could just write to her. So I asked a friend of mine, actually, she runs a very good literature festival in Calcutta, and asked her whether she could introduce me to her formally. And she did. So I requested Shabana Azmi, and very generously she said yes to performing and reading out this story, which obviously, as you said, added a lot to the story.
Yeah, yeah. No, it certainly did, and I mean, one of the things that's wonderful for me, speaking a differently accented English from you, is to hear your stories read either by you or by someone that can get the rhythm and the language in a way that, you know, on the page as I'm reading it might not come out quite the same. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I got responses from people who said, "Oh, this is such a moving poem," and I think that had a lot to do with the rhythm, because of course it's not a poem; it's a short story.
Right. No, but I mean, when it's read by the right person, you know, the lyricism of the lines come out, and that's no, it's one of the things that's quite beautiful about it. But and again, I guess, you know, it brings us back to the original goal of you know, I think Ari says in his introduction to the series that you know, by making these connections, by moving from person to person in this collective project, you know, in some sense we break the siege. You know, we're somewhat less locked down.
Exactly. No, I was very happy to be part of it, and thank you for asking me.
Yeah. Well, no, it's been a great pleasure, and I'm just waiting to see what comes next. Right. So so stay tuned, everyone. Yeah. Thank you.